Anyways, yes.
Next, let's bring in our guest, Sally Hubbard, author of the new book, Monopolies Suck. Hi, Sally.
Hi, thank you so much for having me
What's
today.
up, Sally? Good to have you. All right, let's get right into it. Why do monopolies suck?
Well, monopolies suck for many, many reasons. And unfortunately, this is something that the average person doesn't really understand because the issue of antitrust has become this kind of ivory tower topic that only lawyers and economists are allowed to talk about or understand, when actually it's a tool that belongs to the people. And as a result of the people not knowing anything about antitrust or being able to pressure for anti-monopoly enforcement, what we've ended up with is monopoly rule because the antitrust laws have been gutted over the last 30 years. So I wanted to write this book to make it very accessible to regular people to understand how monopolies make their lives harder every day. And by monopolies, I mean also there's another thing called duopolies, which is two companies that rule an industry, or three companies that rule an industry are called oligopolies. All of these big corporations are making our lives harder by making us pay higher prices, earn less money, have less economic opportunities, and they're affecting our lives as citizens as well.
You know, we all know that Amazon may be a monopoly, and that sounds bad, but the deals are great. So why should the average American, as you say, care if it's not a state monopoly, it's not a government monopoly, but it's rather one that we, the consumers, have created?
Right. I mean, Amazon is one of the monopolies that gets the most attention, and big tech companies. I've been very active on the issue of reining in the big tech companies, and those are harder for people to understand. But we have to remember that big tech is just the beginning. We have big agriculture, we have big pharma, we have big oil. All of these companies are actually making our lives harder and also making, a lot of the country's problems much worse. As far as Amazon goes, I understand that people like a deal. There's actually been lots of evidence showing that the prices are not lower on Amazon anymore. There's very important issues that people need to consider regarding Amazon. For example, you may pay less for your book or something like that. But do you know that Amazon doesn't pay taxes? They actually got a check from the IRS last year for income taxes. And for state and local taxes, they've actually drained the coffers of so many local governments because of small businesses that have closed. So if you're a taxpayer, you're going to be the one making up that difference. You're also going to be the one that suffers when your local community is not funded well and you have to take a terrible subway commute or your schools aren't funded. There's also really important issues involving the workers, and Amazon has a terrible track record involving workers. So I encourage people to think of themselves both as consumers, but also as, you're also an employee or an entrepreneur, and monopolies end up making you make less money and have less opportunities for entrepreneurship. You're also a citizen, and you want to ensure that you have proper democratic processes, not some of the dangerous surveillance that these monopolies are rolling out against the most vulnerable of our population. Our democracy is really at risk when the American dream starts to become not available for the majority of people.
So in spite of these pitfalls, is it even, as an end user, as a consumer, is it even possible to avoid supporting a monopoly at this point? The reason I ask is Google, you go there for information. Facebook, you go there for interaction. Amazon, you go to the shop. Can you even not support them?
Right. So I really encourage people to think about their power as a citizen more than just always defaulting to consumerism as the way to bring about the positive change that we need in our country. So it is really hard to avoid these companies. I mean, big tech is really hard to avoid. It's nearly impossible to avoid Google and Facebook. Their trackers are on every website practically that you visit.
Right.
You cannot avoid big agriculture. It's in all of your food, the seeds that are controlled by Monsanto. So it's really not about using your power as a consumer. Your power as a citizen is so much stronger to encourage your lawmakers to stand up to corporate power and start working for the citizens instead, the way that they're intended to be in a democracy.
You know, what's interesting is when you're talking about the big tech giants, they manage to angry lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. But tell me, do we really need to rely on the government to break these companies up?
Yeah, unfortunately, the other things that we've relied on in the past just aren't going to work at this point. For example, people think, oh, it's the free market, let the free market fix the problems. Well, guess what? The market's not functioning at this point. Any company that tries to compete against these giants just gets squashed. The innovations that could come along and deal with some of the problems that we're seeing with the big tech giants, like the way they spread disinformation and amplify hate speech, and invade our privacy. There are innovative companies that want to come along and put forward better business models, but they can't even get funded because the sources of funding won't fund them when they think they could just be killed by a tech giant. So we can't just depend on the market to fix it. The market is not going to fix it. We most definitely cannot depend on the companies to fix it themselves. They have way too much profits at stake. So this is really about the government, and it's not just using antitrust, but also other tools like privacy laws, bringing out interoperability to allow competitors to be able to basically make their innovations compatible with some of the monopoly infrastructure that we have. There's a whole host of solutions that we need, and yes, it does require government action.
Sally, thank you so much for your time and for this very important conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.